Mark Whitman was an acclaimed author known for his gripping true crime novels. His latest project was inspired by a decades-old cold case, the unsolved murder of a young woman named Emily Hartman. Emily had been a promising college student with a bright future until she was brutally murdered in her small apartment. The case had captivated the nation but remained unsolved, the killer never found. Mark's fascination with the case bordered on obsession, and he was determined to unravel the mystery through his writing. Mark moved into a small, secluded cabin in the woods to focus on his new book. It was a rustic retreat, miles away from the nearest town, with no distractions to divert his attention from his work. The cabin had been rented from an old family friend who assured Mark that the isolation would be perfect for his creative process. Surrounded by dense forest, the cabin was the epitome of solitude, the ideal environment for a writer diving into the darkest corners of a cold case. He brought with him stacks of old newspaper clippings, police reports, and personal notes he had gathered over the years. The extensive collection was meticulously organized, each piece of evidence carefully catalogued. Mark had even managed to acquire copies of Emily's personal diary and letters, granted by her grieving family, in hopes that someone someday would uncover the truth. The cabin, with its creaky floors and distant echoes, seemed the perfect place to immerse himself in Emily's world. The walls were adorned with corkboards covered in photos, maps, and timelines. Strings connected pieces of information in a chaotic yet precise web of connections. Mark's desk was cluttered with notebooks, pens, and his trusty typewriter, an antique piece that had been with him through every book he had ever written. As he pored over the documents, he felt a deep connection to Emily, almost as if she were there with him, guiding his pen. He learned about her childhood, her dreams of becoming a journalist, and the close-knit group of friends she had at college. Emily was the kind of person who lit up a room with her presence, her kindness and ambition, leaving a lasting impression on everyone she met. Her tragic end seemed all the more cruel for the bright future it had snuffed out. The writing flowed effortlessly. Mark's descriptions of Emily's life, her hopes and dreams were vivid and hauntingly real. He could almost hear her voice, feel her presence in the room. He began to stay up late into the night, driven by an inexplicable need to tell her story. The more he wrote, the more he felt he was uncovering hidden truths, pieces of the puzzle that had been overlooked by investigators. One evening, as he was writing a particularly intense scene, detailing the night of Emily's murder, the air in the cabin grew cold. The lights flickered, and a sudden chill ran down Mark's spine. He brushed it off as his imagination running wild, a product of his intense focus on the grim subject matter. But that night, he had a vivid dream. In the dream, he was in Emily's apartment on the night of her murder. He could see her clearly, a young woman with auburn hair and a look of terror in her eyes. She was running from someone, but the face of her pursuer was obscured. The details were sharp and unsettling, the sound of her footsteps echoing in the narrow hallway, the flickering light bulb overhead, the smell of her fear mingling with the musty scent of the old building. Mark woke up in a cold sweat, the dream feeling more like a memory than a figment of his imagination. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had witnessed something real, a glimpse into the final moments of Emily's life. It was as if he had been transported back in time, experiencing the terror firsthand. The intensity of the dream left him shaken, but also more determined than ever to uncover the truth. Determined to push through, Mark continued his work on the novel, but the eerie experiences in the cabin only intensified. Strange occurrences became a daily reality, objects moving on their own, unexplained cold spots, and whispers in the dead of night. At first, Mark tried to rationalize these events. The isolation, lack of sleep, and immersion in such a dark story were playing tricks on his mind, he told himself. Yet deep down, he knew that something supernatural was at play. Emily's spirit seemed to be reaching out to him, desperate to communicate. The more he wrote, the more vivid and disturbing the experiences became. It was as if Emily's presence was growing stronger, her desperation to be heard intensifying with each passing day. Mark's dedication to the project grew into an obsession. He spent hours at his desk, the typewriter's keys clacking away as he poured his soul into the manuscript. The story was no longer just a novel. It was a mission to bring justice to Emily, to give her a voice and uncover the truth that had been buried for so long. One evening, as he was writing about the investigation that followed Emily's murder, the temperature in the cabin dropped suddenly. The lights flickered, and a cold draft blew through the room, despite the windows being shut tight. Mark looked up from his typewriter and saw a faint figure standing in the corner of the room. It was Emily, her eyes filled with sorrow and desperation. She mouthed the words, "Help me," before fading into the shadows. Mark's heart raced as he realized that he was not alone in his quest. Emily's spirit was guiding him, revealing the truth piece by piece. The line between reality and fiction blurred as he delved deeper into the story, his own life becoming entwined with Emily's tragic fate. Determined to uncover the truth and help her find peace, Mark pressed on, unaware of the dark forces that were beginning to close in around him. Determined to push through, Mark continued his work on the novel, but the eerie experiences in the cabin only intensified. Strange occurrences became a daily reality. Objects moving on their own, unexplained cold spots, and whispers in the dead of night. At first, Mark tried to rationalize these events. The isolation, lack of sleep, and immersion in such a dark story were playing tricks on his mind, he told himself. One morning, Mark awoke to find his meticulously organized notes scattered across the cabin floor. Pages from Emily's diary, police reports, and his own handwritten notes were strewn everywhere. The corkboards, once covered in carefully arranged evidence, were now empty, the strings connecting pieces of information hanging loose like spider webs. He felt a chill run down his spine, but he attributed the mess to a possible sleepwalking episode, a side effect of his obsession with the case. As he knelt to pick up the scattered papers, Mark noticed something odd. Several pages were marked with smudges of dirt and what appeared to be blood. His heart pounded as he examined them more closely. The marks formed patterns, almost as if they were trying to convey a message. He decided to lay out the pages on the floor, arranging them as they had been on the boards, and discovered that the patterns formed a crude map. The map led to a specific location in the woods surrounding the cabin. Mark hesitated, the rational part of his mind warning him against following such a bizarre clue. But the connection he felt to Emily and the increasing intensity of the supernatural occurrences compelled him to investigate. He grabbed a flashlight, a notebook, and his coat, then ventured into the dense forest. The woods were eerily silent, the usual sounds of wildlife absent. As Mark followed the map, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Shadows seemed to move at the edges of his vision, and the air grew colder the deeper he went. After nearly an hour of walking, he reached a small clearing. In the center stood an old, decrepit tree, its gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. Mark approached the tree, his flashlight casting long, ominous shadows. At the base of the tree, partially covered by leaves and dirt, he found a rusted metal box. His hands trembled as he pried it open, revealing a collection of items: photographs, letters, and a small blood-stained knife. The photographs were of Emily, taken without her knowledge, and the letters were written by her, detailing her growing fear of being watched and followed. The evidence in the box painted a chilling picture. Emily had been aware of her stalker, someone she had trusted and who had betrayed her. The final letter, written on the night of her murder, was a desperate plea for help. Mark's breath caught in his throat as he realized the implications. Emily's murderer had been closer than anyone had suspected, and the evidence had been hidden away, waiting to be discovered. As Mark absorbed this revelation, the air around him grew colder. He felt a presence behind him and turned to see Emily's ghost standing there, her eyes filled with sorrow and desperation. She pointed to the knife, then to herself, as if urging him to understand. Mark nodded, his heart aching for the young woman who had suffered so much. He promised her he would bring her justice no matter the cost. That night, back at the cabin, Mark couldn't sleep. The supernatural occurrences escalated. The whispers grew louder, and the temperature fluctuated wildly. Objects moved on their own, and he could feel Emily's presence more strongly than ever. It was as if she was trying to communicate something vital, something he had yet to uncover. Desperate for answers, Mark began to research the history of the cabin and the surrounding area. He discovered that the land had a dark past, once the site of numerous mysterious disappearances and rumored occult activities. The cabin itself had been owned by a reclusive man who was suspected of involvement in the occult but was never proven guilty. Mark realized that the cabin was more than just a place to write. It was a nexus of dark energy, amplifying the haunting. The more he delved into the past, the more connections he found between the cabin's history and Emily's murder. The stalker, Mark hypothesized, had used the cabin as a base of operations, hiding evidence and planning the crime. The discovery of the box confirmed this theory, but there were still missing pieces. One night, as Mark was rereading a passage he had written about Emily's final hours, he noticed something strange. The details on the page were not from the police reports or his research. They were new, vivid, and disturbingly accurate. It was as if someone else had written them, someone who had been there. His heart raced as he realized the implications. He was writing things he couldn't possibly know. That night the dream returned, more vivid than before. This time Mark could see through Emily's eyes. She was in her apartment, and the fear was palpable. She glanced at the clock. It was 11:47 p.m. Suddenly the door burst open, and a shadowy figure entered. Emily tried to scream, but no sound came out. Mark woke up, gasping for breath, the terror still gripping him. Shaken, Mark decided to investigate the details from his dreams. He visited the local library, poring over archives and old records. To his astonishment, he found corroborating evidence. Witnesses had reported seeing a shadowy figure near Emily's apartment around the same time he had seen in his dream. The official timeline of events matched perfectly with the scenes he had been writing. As the days passed, Mark's connection with Emily's spirit grew stronger. He began to see fleeting glimpses of her reflection in mirrors and windows. Her presence was always accompanied by a profound sense of sorrow and a desperate plea for justice. It became clear to Mark that Emily's spirit was reaching out to him, using him as a conduit to tell her story and reveal the truth about her murder. Determined to help her, Mark delved deeper into his writing. He began to include details from his dreams, trusting that Emily was guiding him. Each new revelation brought him closer to understanding what had happened that fateful night. But as he uncovered more, the sinister force that had taken Emily's life became aware of his investigation. One evening, as he was writing about the investigation that followed Emily's murder, the temperature in the cabin dropped suddenly. The lights flickered, and a cold draft blew through the room, despite the windows being shut tight. Mark looked up from his typewriter and saw a faint figure standing in the corner of the room. It was Emily, her eyes filled with sorrow and desperation. She mouthed the words, "Help me," before fading into the shadows. Mark's heart raced as he realized that he was not alone in his quest. Emily's spirit was guiding him, revealing the truth piece by piece. The line between reality and fiction blurred as he delved deeper into the story, his own life becoming entwined with Emily's tragic fate. Determined to uncover the truth and help her find peace, Mark pressed on, unaware of the dark forces that were beginning to close in around him. Mark's relentless pursuit of the truth began to take a toll on his mental and physical health. He became gaunt and haggard, his eyes hollow from lack of sleep. The dreams continued, each one revealing more about Emily's final moments and the identity of her killer. The cabin, once a place of solace and creativity, now felt oppressive and sinister. One stormy night, Mark was jolted awake by a loud crash. The front door had been blown open, and rain poured into the cabin. As he got up to close the door, he saw a figure standing in the doorway, Emily. She looked at him with pleading eyes and then turned, pointing towards the woods before disappearing into the darkness. Mark knew he had to follow her. Grabbing a flashlight and his coat, Mark ventured into the stormy night. He followed the path through the woods, guided by fleeting glimpses of Emily's apparition. The wind howled, and the trees seemed to whisper his name. After what felt like hours, he arrived at a clearing with an old, abandoned well. Emily's ghost hovered near it, pointing inside. Mark peered into the well and saw something glinting in the flashlight's beam. He carefully lowered himself down and retrieved a small, rusted box. Inside were letters, photographs, and a blood-stained knife, evidence that had been hidden away for decades. The letters were from Emily, detailing her fear of someone she knew, someone who had been stalking her. As Mark read the letters, the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. Emily's murderer was someone she had trusted, a friend who had become obsessed with her. The evidence in the box was enough to implicate the killer and bring justice to Emily's memory. But just as Mark began to climb out of the well, the flashlight flickered and died. In the darkness, he heard footsteps approaching. Panic set in as he realized he was not alone. The killer, now aware of Mark's investigation, had come to silence him. Mark scrambled out of the well and ran through the woods, clutching the box. He could hear the killer behind him, gaining ground. Desperation fueled his escape, and he barely made it back to the cabin. Once inside, Mark barricaded the door and called the police. He explained everything, from the haunting dreams to the evidence he had found. The police arrived just in time, arresting the killer who had followed Mark back to the cabin. As the officers led the murderer away, Mark felt a sense of relief and closure. Emily's spirit had finally found peace. However, that night, as Mark lay in bed, he felt an unsettling presence. The temperature dropped, and he heard a soft whisper in his ear. "Thank you." He turned to see Emily standing at the foot of his bed. Her eyes were no longer filled with sorrow, but with gratitude. She smiled, and her form began to fade. Mark woke up the next morning feeling lighter, as if a heavy burden had been lifted from his shoulders. The cabin, too, felt different. The oppressive atmosphere had vanished, replaced by a sense of calm. He believed that Emily had finally moved on, her spirit free from the torment of her unsolved murder. Determined to honor Emily's memory, Mark dedicated himself to finishing the novel. He poured every detail, every revelation, and every emotion into the manuscript. The story was no longer just about solving a murder. It was about giving voice to a victim who had been silenced for far too long. The novel became a tribute to Emily, a testament to her life and the quest for justice. As he wrote the final chapters, Mark couldn't help but feel a profound connection to Emily. It was as if she were guiding his hand, ensuring that her story was told accurately and truthfully. The novel's climax detailed the confrontation with the killer, the discovery of the evidence, and the ultimate arrest that brought closure to the case. With the manuscript complete, Mark sent it to his publisher. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Critics hailed the novel as his best work yet, praising its authenticity and emotional depth. The book, titled The Ghostwriter, quickly became a bestseller, captivating readers with its chilling tale of a haunted writer and a restless spirit seeking justice. But even as the book garnered acclaim, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. The haunting had stopped, but the memories lingered. The vivid dreams, the eerie occurrences, and the connection to Emily had left an indelible mark on his soul. He realized that while he had helped bring closure to Emily's case, the experience had changed him forever. One evening, as Mark sat by the fireplace in the cabin, reflecting on the journey he had undertaken, he noticed something strange. The fire flickered, casting long shadows on the walls. In the dancing flames, he saw fleeting images, scenes from Emily's life, moments of happiness and sorrow. It was as if she were saying goodbye, leaving behind a final message of gratitude. Mark smiled, feeling a sense of peace wash over him. He knew that Emily was finally at rest, her spirit free from the torment that had bound her to the mortal world. As he watched the flames, he whispered, "Thank you, Emily," and felt a gentle breeze brush against his cheek, like a ghostly caress. The journey had been long and harrowing, but it had also been transformative. Mark had not only uncovered the truth behind Emily's murder, but had also discovered a deeper understanding of the human spirit and the power of justice. The cabin, once a place of darkness, had become a sanctuary of light, a place where stories of the past could find their resolution and peace. And so Mark Whitman, the ghostwriter who had bridged the gap between the living and the dead, continued to write, his stories infused with the wisdom and experience gained from his haunting encounter with Emily Hartman. With the publication of The Ghostwriter, Mark Whitman thought his journey with Emily Hartman had come to a close. The novel's success brought him recognition and praise, but it also brought a sense of closure to Emily's case. Mark returned to his cabin, ready to start his next project, believing the haunting was behind him. Little did he know, the story was far from over. One evening, as Mark was reading by the fireplace, a knock echoed through the cabin. It was unusual for anyone to visit, given the remote location. He opened the door to find a middle-aged man with a haunted look in his eyes. The man introduced himself as David Hartman, Emily's older brother. David had read the novel and had come to thank Mark in person for bringing his sister's story to light. But there was something unsettling in his demeanor. He seemed restless, constantly glancing over his shoulder. As they talked, David revealed that he had been conducting his own investigation into Emily's murder for years, driven by a need for answers and justice. He shared his suspicions that the person arrested and convicted based on Mark's findings might not have been acting alone. David believed there was a deeper conspiracy at play, involving powerful people who had covered up the truth. He had found discrepancies in the police reports and evidence that suggested someone else had been orchestrating the events from behind the scenes. Mark listened intently, his curiosity piqued. The idea that the case was more complex than he had imagined intrigued him, and he agreed to help David uncover the truth. Together they pored over the documents, looking for clues that had been overlooked. The more they dug, the more they realized how deep the conspiracy ran. As they delved deeper, strange things began to happen again in the cabin. Mark started having nightmares, not of Emily's murder, but of shadowy figures watching him. Objects moved on their own, and a feeling of unease settled over the cabin. David, too, experienced eerie occurrences, hearing whispers and seeing fleeting apparitions. One night, Mark awoke to find David gone. Panicked, he searched the cabin and the surrounding woods, but found no trace of him. Desperate and afraid, Mark called the police, but they could find no evidence of foul play. It was as if David had vanished into thin air. The disappearance of David Hartman left Mark shaken. He felt an overwhelming sense of guilt and responsibility. Determined to uncover the truth and find David, he intensified his investigation. He reviewed their findings and noticed a pattern. All the key witnesses and suspects had connections to a powerful, secretive organization that had long been rumored to influence local politics and law enforcement. Mark reached out to old contacts and dug into archives, piecing together the organization's involvement in the case. He discovered that Emily had been investigating the same group for an article she was writing, which explained why she had been targeted. The organization had silenced her to protect their secrets, and they had framed an innocent person to cover their tracks. The realization that Emily's murder was part of a larger conspiracy left Mark horrified, but determined. He gathered all the evidence and wrote an exposé detailing the organization's involvement in the murder and the subsequent cover-up. The article, published in a major newspaper, caused a national outcry and led to a reopening of the case. However, with the newfound attention came danger. Mark began receiving threats, and strange accidents started happening around him. It became clear that the organization would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. Mark, undeterred, continued to fight for justice, knowing that he was risking his life. Sarah's arrival brought a glimmer of hope, but it also heightened the danger. Together, they worked to consolidate their findings, preparing to turn everything over to the authorities. As they worked, the haunting presence in the cabin intensified. Mark saw Emily's ghost more frequently, her eyes filled with urgency and warning. One night, while reviewing the final pieces of evidence, the cabin was attacked. Masked men broke in, destroying documents and threatening their lives. Mark and Sarah fought back, managing to escape into the woods. They hid in the darkness, the sounds of their pursuers echoing through the trees. In the chaos, Mark was separated from Sarah. He stumbled through the forest, driven by fear and determination. As he ran, he saw Emily's ghost leading him to a hidden path. Following her, he found a cave where Sarah had taken refuge. Inside, they regrouped and decided to make one last stand. The next morning, they contacted a trusted journalist and arranged a meeting to hand over the evidence. The journalist, well known for exposing corruption, promised to protect them and ensure the truth was revealed. As they left the cave, they felt a sense of relief, believing they were finally safe. However, as they approached the meeting place, they were ambushed. The journalist had been compromised, and the organization was waiting for them. In the ensuing struggle, Mark was fatally wounded, but not before he managed to give Sarah the evidence. He urged her to run, to expose the truth no matter what. With tears in her eyes, Sarah fled, clutching the dossier. Mark, his vision fading, saw Emily's ghost one last time. She smiled at him, her eyes filled with gratitude and sadness. As darkness enveloped him, he felt a sense of peace, knowing he had done everything he could to bring justice to Emily and uncover the truth. Sarah, driven by Mark's sacrifice and Emily's memory, successfully exposed the organization. The truth about Emily's murder and the conspiracy was revealed, leading to the arrest of key figures and a nationwide reckoning. Mark's novel, The Ghostwriter, became a symbol of the relentless pursuit of justice, and his legacy lived on through his work and the people he had inspired. Emily's spirit finally found peace, her story told, and her murderer brought to justice. And though Mark's life was cut short, his bravery and dedication ensured that the truth would prevail, reminding the world that even in the face of darkness, the light of justice can never be extinguished.